A very good afternoon to all. I once again welcome you in the fourth lecture of the lecture series on contemporary debates in politics, organized by the Department of Political Science, Vasanta College for Women, Rajghat, Varanasi. I'm very happy that today also we have with us Professor Manoj Mishra, sir, coordinator, Malviya Center for Peace Research, Banaras Hindu University. In the previous lecture, he spoke on the theoretical perspective on political violence. Today, he'll be speaking on political violence in India, trends and dimensions. I welcome you, sir, on the behalf of the Department of Political Science and on my personal behalf. And now I'll request you, sir, to start your lecture. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Preeti. So today I will take another 10-12 minutes. The other day I could not summarize the theories of political violence. So today actually the material which I will be giving to you on Monday or Tuesday, there will be around 3 or 4 material which will look into the aspects of political violence and the political violence in the Indian context. But today, before starting on to the political violence in the Indian context, I will give you some theories of political violence. So actually, there are two kinds of major theories. One is called the macro theories, and another is called the micro theories. In the macro theories, we will be looking at the political, economic, and the social processes that causes political violence. And in the micro theories, we will be discussing about the political violence process that involves individuals and households which participate in violence and what motivates people to participate in political violence. So the first theory coming under the macro major theories are the social conflict theory. It is basically the social nature of conflict, of violence, political violence. And it looks into the state that the social system reflects the vested interests of those who control the resources. The people in power use the political and economic institutions to explain the groups with less power. This causes the rest of the society to become alienated and psychologically separated from the people in power. And this usually breaks down into revolution or mass movements, and people indulge to achieve equity and social unity by joining political violence. War is also coming under this theory of political violence. I will not go into a war because war is a ultimate analysis of between two countries that why violence takes place. The third theory is the functionalist aspect of political violence. So society is seen as a living organism whose entire system has to be in good working order for systemic equilibrium to be maintained. However, when there is a shock in the system, society becomes disorientated, allowing collective violence to take place. So this is basically the functional aspect of political violence. Another theory is called the mass society theory. Mass society is basically an idea which evolved in the 60s and 70s in Europe and in highly industrialized societies. That in mass societies, because of hyper industrialization and individualism, people get completely isolated. They become like atoms. And in mass society, social movements come from people who are isolated and socially and politically from institutions. People who are alienated in the process can easily be convinced to join radical or extremist movements. So this has been found in many countries of highly industrialized countries like Europe and in American societies, but mostly in Europe. So the fifth aspect of macro theory is resource mobilization theory. This theory looks into the social movement that emphasizes the capacity of the competing groups to organize the use adequate resources to achieve their goals. The resource can be time, money, organizational skill, certain social and political opportunities. So political violence occurs when individuals are able to mobilize sufficient resources to take into action. So this is basically the resource mobilization. There can be another theory called primordialism, which I was talking about, that people are identity conscious. They don't want to lose their identity. Inter-ethnic differences based on racial, language, and religious and religion characteristics and other visible markers produce inter-ethnic conflicts because members of the same group emotionally identify with their own people and they feel so much identity that those who are outside the group, and that makes them to take up political violence uh, in order to in order to get their demands accepted. Another aspect of macro theories, another theory is instrumentalism, explains the ethnic violence and ethnic conflict. That ethnicity is not inherent in human nature, and conflict occurs when leaders manipulate ethnicity for sake of political power or economic gain. It acts as an instrument because mobilization can easily take place when people belonging to the same culture, same language, same religion can come together and start a kind of a political violence movement. So these are some of the macro theories which we are looking at. Some of the micro theories are rational choice theory. So rational choice theory is basically looking into the decision-making process in which decisions makers compare the expected utility for competing opinions and select options that produce the most favorable outcome. So political violence occurs when benefits in participating in the violence outweighs the cost. So now let's see the farmer movement. Although it is not violent in nature, because the farmer movements, especially from Punjab, Western Uttar Pradesh, and Haryana, these are farmers and there are rich farmers, and these people are manipulating the entire farming mandis for their own benefit. So they think that uh, when this new law comes in, that will actually take away some of the benefits which they are getting in the present situation. Although it has not become violent in nature, it can anytime become violent. But sometimes non-violent movements also become violent in the due course of time. So the rational choice theory sometimes is more important because individuals think and they manipulate the people in order to create some political violence for their own benefit. Yesterday, last class, I was also talking about the relative deprivation theory, and it is again a theory that people think that they are relatively deprived, and this deprivation will cause some kind of anguish and anger among the people to take up with political violence. So these are some of the theories. Another theory is called the greed versus the grievance theory. In the greed versus the grievance theory, provides the two line of explanation as to why individuals will fight and create political violence. Mostly this kind of greed versus grievance is political violence takes place in Africa and some Latin American countries. Uh, People are motivated and are said to be motivated by greed when they decide to join a conflict or a violence in order to benefit the situation in which they find themselves by joining a rebellion or any kind of collective violence in greater than joining. So this makes them that there is some benefit they will get if they indulge in this political violence. So this was basically a World Bank project which started by Paul Collier and K. Hoffler. They argued that greed is a better predictor of participating in violence than grievance. So this greed and grievance theory also sometimes makes people to join political violence. And another and the last theory on this aspect of micro theory is collective action theory. Why people participate in rebellion? A person decides to participate and not to participate in a rebellion based on the benefits and the cost. So basically, there are public goods and private goods, and when they think that the public goods they will not be benefited by the aspects of the public good, they basically join some kind of political violence in order to benefit out of this violence. So this, I just wanted to tell you that there are certain theories uh, which actually causes political violence, because in social science and in political science, we have to understand that what are the causal aspect. Causal means what causes this violence. So looking at a theoretical point of view, so these are some of the theories which I have been looking at and trying to give you an impression that how political violence, and these theories are based on research, that some of the theories sometimes act individually or in groups in order to start a political violence. So sometimes one theory or two theories or two, three different theories are in combination for any political violence to take place. So this is the theoretical aspect of political violence. Then today I am putting my lecture uh, in order to understand why political violence in India and what are the salient different aspects of political violence in India. And I will take 4 or 5 aspects of it and then try to understand that mostly what kind of political violence happens in India. So the first, you see, post-independence India, uh, there was very less kind of communal riots post-independent India. But initially, when India was getting independent and the partition was taking place, so you must have understood that a lot of people were exchanged from Pakistan. They came to India, and from India they went to Pakistan. So that was also a kind of a political violence, which I will talk to later. So now I will start with the first aspect of political violence is the Naxal movement in India, or the Maoist, or popularly otherwise called as the Maoist movement in India. The term Naxalism or Naxal comes from the Naxalbari, a small village in Darjeeling district of West Bengal, where a section of the Communist Party of India Marxist, led by Charu Majumdar and Kanu Sanyal, led an uprising in 1967. So they formed a revolutionary opposition group against the official CPIM leadership. The landlord attacked the tribals who were granted by the court the right of piece of land on the basis of tenancy rights. So it was the court decision that the landlord was supposed to take back the land. And the revolutionary cadres of CPIM counterattacked the landlord and gave rise to the Naxal uprising. So this small piece of land in Naxalbari region of Darjeeling in North Bengal started this huge movement called the Naxalbari or Naxal movement in India, which is otherwise called the Maoist movement in India. So this uprising was spearheaded by Charu Mazumdar. A peaceful revolution was launched and called by the Sikakulam in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh and led by C. Pulla Reddy. So it spread, it is mostly this Naxal movement is found in the Dandakaranya region of India, starting from Pashupati to Tirupati. Pashupati is a place in Nepal and Tirupati is a place in Andhra Pradesh. So the entire Red Corridor, which is popularly called as the Red Corridor, so the Naxal movement is mostly popular in this Red Corridor from Pashupati to Tirupati area. So this incident, the radicals comprehended that the Indian situation is similar to China prior to 1949 and characterized it as a semi-colonial and feudal system. You see, in China, it was also ruled by a king before 1949. And when Mao Zedong took over and started this revolution called the Cultural Revolution of China, and after 1949, there has been the communist rule in China till date. And the Indians thought, or the Indian communist leaders thought that the situation which was prevalent in China before 1949 is the same which is prevalent in India in 1967. And that is the reason why they started this movement. And it is popularly otherwise called as the Maoist movement in India. So the People's Democratic Revolution should be launched in India by the immediate resorting to armed struggle following the Chinese lines. So this was the idea behind why to start a political violent movement in India in the form of a Naxal movement. So the whole country gathered in Calcutta, a left-wing extremist founded by the All India Coordination Committee. They called that the Indian officers in an excellent situation for a revolution in order for a socio-economic condition. So in May 1968, the committee remained an All India Coordination Committee of the Marxist Revolution, and they started to declare an ideological, the protracted people war, or it is some kind of a guerrilla warfare, established a rural revolutionary base, finally encircling the cities as well as the abstaining areas in parliamentary elections. So the Naxalbari experience started mostly it is also there in eastern part, that's Chandoli and Robertsganj area, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, parts of Odisha, Chhattisgarh. So these are the region where the Naxal movement became popular, and it was an armed political violence against the state. And till now it is going on, but now the movement is not that active as it was in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So the violence is mostly based on the socio-economic and political factors, which is in fact contribute to create conditions conducive to physical violence, particularly for the growth of Naxalism. The socio-economic political conditions prevailing in the country can be regarded as one of the reasons, major reasons for this violence. So, Naxal violence, both in quality and quantity, in fact, directly related to the intensity of the feeling of the people, their actual perceived deprivation, and their commitment to take revenge against those who are believed to be responsible for such denial. So, it is also we can think that because of the farmers, because of the landless people, they are socially deprived of the land, of other things which are supposed to be in the hands of the zamindars or the rich people, landlords. So it is basically here that the social deprivation theory is in place to look at the exploitation which is happening, and the government is they think that the government is facilitating this exploitation against the common farmers and the people. So Naxal violence is designed to inflict injury to a person or a damaged property. Broadly speaking, any act by Naxal, whether covert or overt, that corrodes and causes physical hurt, material loss, mental anguish, or which degrades human being or which violates human rights, dignity, and decency, should be perceived as an act of violence and always depicted these days as Naxal violence. So this is a kind of a political violence, and it has been there. It is a continuous process. You see, communal riots happens for a particular period of time and then it subsides. But this Naxal violence it is a continuous process. Till now also, you will be hearing in newspapers and in news channels that there was an Naxal attack. Last week there was an Naxal attack in the Sukhma region of Chhattisgarh, where two Indian CRPF Jawans were killed. So this is a continuous process, which is a very pertinent form of continued political violence against the state. So the topographical suitability for continuing the strategic advantage, because I was telling you, the Naxal people, the Naxal movement is very much in the jungle areas. You will never find the Naxal movement has flourished in urban and in semi-urban or urban areas. It is only in the tribal areas, the jungle areas, the Dandakaran region, where the Naxal has become very effective. The main support for the Naxal movement comes from the marginalized people, such as the Dalits, Adivasis, and the deprived people of India. The people of the tribal areas, through their country, remain outside the mainstream of socio-political and process, and they resent their alienation. So the cause of the growth of the Naxal problem is many. The slow implementation of land reforms. You see, in India, there has not been land reforms in a big way after independence. So mostly the landlords frequently move to courts to delay implementation of these reforms. They also connive with the politicians and the bureaucrats and make land reforms process slow and cumbersome. Land reforms have been failed in India, because that is one of the reasons why the Naxal movement have been trying to look at this political violence. The second aspect of the Naxal movement is the social structure. The social structure of the society in these areas can be cited as another reason for emergence of Naxal problem. So I will be looking at the social structure and how the social structure of the society has facilitated the political violence of Naxalism in India. So, Naxal problem exists where there is a poor section of the society with no resources to meet their minimum economic requirements. Of course, the caste and tribal structure may not be exclusively attributed to the reason of the problem, but the poor include various castes and not only a particular caste or group of caste. However, their poverty and lack of ability to improve their due financial custody of accessing education, government machineries, or even legal remedies remain an important factor for the support of the Naxals. Moreover, this is the second reason why the Naxal movement and the violent political movement was sustained efforts for the last 40 years in India. The young generation of people in the rural areas want to have facilities that are available in urban areas, which remains a distant dream. And because of the infrastructural problems, the failure of the government to perform. So this is the third reason why Naxalism has become so prominent in areas like this. Therefore, the failure of the government to reach out to the rural areas is another major factor for the aid of Naxal in these areas. Good governance is poor. In certain places, it is non-existent. Popular schemes take long times, but are very much to be implemented. Even while implementing, the benefit always reach those who have haves and those who are really needy. They are not actually benefited with the popular schemes of the government. The failure in formation and implementation of the right schemes at the right time and the targeting uh, right people are the major problem. Despite the rise of national problem, the state has failed to tackle effectively and undertaking the needed economic and political measures. The state has failed to perform its duties. In short, governance or lack of it in these areas is the primary reason for the growth of Naxal problem. Another reason is corruption. There is a lot of corruption to implementation of the schemes, the government schemes. Although at present the corruption has come down to quite an extent, but in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and especially the 90s, corruption was one of the main reasons for the rise of Naxal in these areas. Further, political interference has also played a significant role in the implementation of government schemes. Leaders have always tried to delay the projects which are promoted by the opponent parties. So the Naxal leaders took advantage of the miserable socio-economic conditions of the poor and the downtrodden and organized Naxal groups. And the collective levies of the local population collect funds for the individuals, groups, and even government officials as commission. You see, the Naxals used to have cut from Tata Company also, bureaucrats, and other government officials in order to run their Naxal movement. They were taking commissions from the big businessmen, the land, the mining, because most of these areas where the Naxal problem is, it is also the mining areas of India, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, and all these areas. These are the rich mining places. And this is the place where the Naxal have actually flourished. So the money they used by Naxal groups to buy arms, recruit new members, especially from the unemployed youths in the rural areas. Since the Naxal provides a monthly salary and uniform, they have become popular amongst the unemployed youths. Thus, the growth of Naxalites movement is due to these various factors. So this is the Naxal movement in India is one of the most continued political violence movement. And it is there for the last 45 years, since the late 60s. And till present, it is one of the big, although it is not that effective and not that widespread at present, but still their presence is there. The government, actually, the previous government, the UPA government had a lot of operations against the Naxals, and the present government is also taking a very strong stand against the Naxal movement in India. And at present, it is not that effective, but it is still there. So this is the first kind of continued political violence, which is there in India for the last so many years. The second aspect is basically we are looking at is the caste violence. So as you know, caste is one of the reality of Indian politics. The great Rajni Kothari, in his famous book Caste in Indian Politics, wrote that since caste is a social phenomena and politics is actually an outcome of a social phenomena, so there will always be caste in Indian politics. So you cannot avoid the caste calculation when you are looking at the Indian political scene. So caste-based violence has been growing in India, especially after independence. So the Harijans and the Dalits are discriminated against the Hindu caste, mostly the lower caste people, the Harijans and the Dalits, and they are subjugated to atrocities and exploitations. The present decade has witnessed upsurge in Dalits and started to retaliate. Thus, violence between the forward caste and the backward caste, especially Uttar Pradesh, parts of Haryana, Bihar, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and other parts of India also, but these are the main parts where caste violence is very prevalent. Most of these conflicts have been due to the atrocities against the Dalits, the land disputes, disputes over sharing of crops, payment of minimum wages, molestation and even rapes of Dalit women, prevention of Dalits from participating in local religious festivals, old enmity arising out of traditional caste feuds, and rise of Dalit consciousness. So these are some of the reasons why there has been, because what has happened is that in the last post-independence, so the Dalits and the lower caste, they are also vote banks. Vote banks in the sense that people look at them that these are people who can vote and bring us to power. So there has been a lot of politics and lot of political violence in order to capture these vote banks in the process. So this is one of the reasons why the caste in Indian politics has become so violent in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. At present, we cannot say that the caste violence and caste politics is there, but not to the extent to which it was earlier times. The Indian Constitution has formally abolished caste, and in the context, it has made there are 15 that prohibits discrimination on grounds of religion, Article 15, race, caste, sex, place of birth, and Article 17 abolishes untouchability. Article 29 protects the interests of the minorities, and Article 46 promotes the education and economic interests of the scheduled castes, tribes, and other weaker sections of the society. Thus, Constitution of India prohibits the discrimination of caste on the grounds of caste, religion, race, language, sex, and place of birth, and other things. Following such constitutional measures, the Indian government has successfully passed Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955, Bonded Labor System Abolition Act 1976, Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention Atrocities Act 1989, Unemployment of Manual Scavenging and Construction of Dry Latrines Provision Act 1993. And despite these efforts, these related laws, there are many painful cases of reactions, caste violence, and the constant rise in the early 90s, causing thousands of deaths. So it is unfortunate that until recent times, the persecution of the low caste of the strata of the society by the upper caste seems to be intensified, and some regions, this oppression takes place sharply in violent forms. So another aspect of this is caste violence is the caste armies. You must have heard the name of private armies in Bihar, the Sunlight Sena, the Lachit Sena, and the famous caste army in Bihar, where Bindeswari was one of the main aspects, main persons who organized caste armies to fight against each other, to protect their lands and property. So this was one of the reasons why you can understand that caste is one of the major political violence happening in India. So caste riots have marginally increased in post 2000, but At present, we do not find it frequently happening, but still, caste is seen as a political vote bank in Indian politics. And it is one of the main reasons it can happen anytime, that a violence can take place anytime. But at present, it is in the lower ebb. Now let's come to the third aspect of Indian politics, is the communal violence. Communal violence in India for the first time happened in Banaras in the year 1809. I hope all of you must have heard the name of Lat Bhairav, which is at Golgadda. Once you go to Vasanta College, before you take the right turn in Golgadda area, in the left-hand side, you can go for a field work there. There is a Bhairav called Lat Bhairav. So that place is a very interesting place. There is a Bhairav, Lat Bhairav is there. There is also a mosque in that area. And the first communal riot which took place in India was in the year 1809 in the Lat Bhairav region. So communal violence refers to the situation where violence perpetuated across community lines, especially in India, that is between the Hindus and the Muslims. The term is commonly used to describe those incidents where conflicts between two communities results in massacres and deaths. Communal conflict is a violent conflict between two groups belonging to two different religions and organized along shared communal identity. So violent conflicts refers to the fact that the communal parties use lethal violence to gain control over some dispute of land, territory, resources, such as piece of land, local political power, and many aspects of it. So this follows a generally accepted conceptualization of armed conflict. So the group involved are non-state actors, meaning they are neither control the state or the armed forces. Finally, the groups are organized along shared communal identity, meaning that they are not formally organized rebel groups or militias, but the confrontation takes place along lines of group identity. Communal identity is a conceptualized and subjective group identification based on common history, common culture, and common core values, in which religion is the most important aspect. So communal violence in India post, I was telling you that the highest number of people who died was in partition time. The partition in India, which took place in 1947, and India was divided into Pakistan and India. And a lot of people from Pakistan, the Hindus, were trying to return to India, and a lot of Muslims were trying to go to Pakistan. And that is the highest amount of communal riots and violence which took place in the history of India, partition. A lot of people died, and another aspect of communal took place in 1971 when Bangladesh became another country, and a lot of people died in Bangladesh because of community riots. Because mostly Bangladeshis were Muslims, but they were not speaking Urdu; they were speaking the Bangla language. So the difference between the community riots was because the Pakistanis were speaking Urdu and the people of Bangladesh were speaking Bengali. So this was another reason of communal rights in India. Communalism involves the exploitation of the social pluralism of Indian society by fundamental groups, organizations, and sects for securing their respective narrow conceived political, religion, and sectarian goals. So Hindu-Muslim conflict in North, South, Hindu-Christian communal rights in Kerala, Hindu-Sikhs rights in Punjab, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, and certain other parts of North India are examples of communal violence. For instance, after the state intervention in the Golden Temple in Amritsar in 1984, which was followed by the assassination of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, anti-Sikhs riots broke out in many parts of India. And after the demolition of the Babri Masjid, communal violence took place in many parts of India. In 2002, after the Godhra incident in Gujarat, so these were the last communal big riots in India in the post-independence time. And in the present time, communal rights are in the decrease, but it is still one of the biggest challenges that political violence in the form of community can happen anytime in India. And the fourth aspect of political violence in India is basically terrorism. So terrorism is one of the greatest the greatest political violence post independent India has started. And terrorism as such started in Punjab with the Khalistan movement, but that was started in 1980. And then after 1989, after the Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan, another form of terrorism which took place is in Kashmir, which was aided by Pakistan. So terrorism usually refers to threats, violence, intimidation, and physical manipulation of behavior of others by using violent methods. Terrorism is clearly a subcategory of socio-political violence. It is a premeditated, usually politically motivated threatened use of violence in order to induce fear and intimidate victims, usually for the purpose of influencing another less reachable audience, such as the government. So terrorism is defined as the use of violence by non-state actors, because the terrorist group is one of the biggest non-state actors in the form of Khalistan terrorist organizations and the Pakistani and the Kashmiri-based terrorist organizations which are there. They are called non-state actors. So these non-state actors use terror as a part of a conventional military force which is not available to them. So because they know that they cannot fight the Indian army or any army face to face. So terrorism is basically a ploy which has been adopted, which indulges in guerrilla warfare, terrorist act like hijacking, firing at mobs in crowded places, putting bombs at crowded places. So this is the tactics of the terrorist organizations. The states do sometimes sponsor non-state terrorist organizations as a means to extend their proxy war. That what is Pakistan doing? Pakistan has actually fought 4 wars with India, and all the 4 wars they have lost. So they have adopted this terrorism as a non-state actor. They train them, they finance them, they provide them weapons, and they send them to India to fight against the Indian state. So this is a new form of proxy war, which was started by a state, and it is everywhere in the world. If you look at Middle East, look at North Africa, some of the Latin American countries, what happened in 9/11 in America, Europe. So basically, these are all proxy wars, and there is a lot of state influence, state sponsorship to these terrorist groups. So this is a new kind of political violence which has evolved globally in the form of terrorism. So the UN has classified terrorism in one of its resolutions into 6 categories: civil disorders, political terrorism, non-political terrorism, quasi-terrorism, limited political terrorism, and official or state terrorism. So terrorism poses a serious challenge to the domestic population as well as to the global community. It is the threatened use of violence for the purpose of creating fear, order, and political, religious, ideological goals. The target of terrorist acts may be civilian, government officials, military, and people at large in the interest of the government. It is being used as a method whereby any organized groups or party seems to achieve its aim. It's basically trying to create terror among the people and the state and to make it imbalanced. Sometimes the terrorist groups like the Al Qaeda and the ISIS have controlled a portion of the land, like parts of Afghanistan, parts of Syria, parts of North Iraq, has been controlled by terrorist organized groups, and they carry out their activities there. So I stop here. I have taken this lecture for 45 minutes now. So if any questions are there, I can answer. and I will send four material which I have collected, and you can use them for your academic purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was actually you discussed so many dimensions of political violence in India, and you discussed the theories of political violence, and you also tried to give an explanation how the theories are working in practice by giving the example of a Naxal movement. So now I'll request my student to post their questions in the chat box so that we can have more discussion and their doubts may be clarified. So, student, you may post your questions in
Okay.
the chat box. Meanwhile, sir, one student have sent a question on the WhatsApp because
Yeah.
she is having some
Okay.
difficulties, some technical glitches.
Okay.
So she wants
Okay.
to know that what is the impact of gender on political? How to see relation between gender violence and political
Okay.
violence?
Okay. That is another topic altogether. But in the context of Naxal violence, I would discuss that some of the Naxal and the terrorist groups, they actually have a woman wing. They use gender as, like in the case of Tamil Tigers, how the women were used to assassinate the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, and there are private armies of the Naxal and the terrorist groups, which has a lot of gender women cadres in it. Although the women cadre, there is no equality as such among the men and the women in the Naxal or in the terrorist organizations, but still, gender is taken as a ploy, as a weapon, because sometimes they use women or the second sex in order to achieve their goals, and which can be easily achieved. So this aspect has been discussed and has been researched very well, and the gender aspect of political violence, where women are used as a weapon in order to achieve goals. So it will take another class to discuss about the gender aspect of political violence. But I'm just telling you that how terrorist organizations and the Naxal groups in India have used gender as a ploy in order to achieve their goals.
Okay, thank you, sir. One more question is on WhatsApp only.
Yeah.
She is
Okay.
asking that what remedies can be there for meeting out these diverse form of
Yeah.
political violence in India?
Yeah. The best aspect of political violence is development. If there is a uniform development all across India, you see, the India in the first 50, 60 years, there was development, but there was development in pockets. Overall development in uniform development in India, because the fruits were not reaching the rural and the interior and in the tribal areas and in the Dalit areas. So if the development has been uniform, and if there are jobs and if there are opportunities, if there are economic prosperity, so this is one of the reasons which we look at, that why some of the developed countries of the world, especially the Latin America, the Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and all these countries of Europe, they don't have this kind of problem as such, political violence. There is a different kind of violence, political violence, because these are all developed countries. And whenever there is more development, there is less political violence. That is what research and theory says. So
Thank you, sir.
development is one of the biggest aspect for less political violence.
Okay, thank you, sir. One question is by Priya Patel. She's asking, sir, after some riots,
Yeah.
some political activists get
Uh,
arrested or penalized financially. Would it sometimes lead to
okay.
lack of enthusiasm in revolt and suppress the voices
Mm.
against government policies?
Yeah, that is a very good question, because some of the present governments have told that whenever you do political violence and destroy the properties of the government, the common properties of the government, that has to be recovered from the rioters itself. So this has happened in Uttar Pradesh, this has happened in some parts of Madhya Pradesh and in some areas of India. But the problem is that being peace and conflict studies people, we do not support violence in any kind, neither direct nor political nor structural nor cultural. So you can have non-violent protest. So at present, the farmer protest is non-violent in nature. So this is the non-violent protest is one of the best way to protest and get your demands accepted. But once you indulge in political violence or violence as such, so then your whole purpose or the whole agenda of protest is fizzled out. Then the government can act as a repressive measures because the government has more aspects of because it is a storehouse of the police and the armed forces and everything. So they can create a more violent reaction to the political violence of the people in charge. So mostly we always prefer to have non-violent protest. The way Anna Hazare did the protest in 2011 and 12. So that is a classic example of a non-violent protest.
Thank you, sir. So another question is by Anamika Gupta. She's asking, does democracy plays any role in perpetrating or mitigating political violence?
You see, there is no political violence in China. There cannot be political violence in China because China is not a democratic state. China is a highly communist and authoritarian in nature. So people cannot go and protest in the streets of China. That is a different ball game or a level altogether. In democracy, the right to resent is the biggest aspect of democracy. You see, the government can also be wrong. The government may be wrong in looking at, if you look at the farm bill in some aspect or the other. Because the point is that you always, the right to dissent or the right to protest is one of your fundamental rights. It cannot be taken away. And India being a democracy, this right to protest or dissent, either in the way of protest, street marches or hartals or road blocking, these can be allowed because in democracy, these are all aspects of good governance and good democracy and a healthy way to lodge your protest. But we are not an authoritarian country like China or some other countries like in the world, North Korea or Cuba or anything like that. But the right to protest should always be there because the government has all the chances to become authoritarian if the right to protest is not there, like in the case of China.
Thank you, sir. One question is by Shahana Idarsi. She's asking, what are the steps government is taking to fulfill the requirements of Naxals? I mean, to prevent the Naxal violence, what steps they are taking?
So they are following the carrot and stick policy. The most important aspect of the government policy is to develop the Naxal regions. Road connectivity, infrastructure development, schools, colleges, hospitals, and all kind of infrastructure facility are to be there in the Naxal regions or the remote parts of India. So if the people are gainfully employed, are having access to education, having access to good health system, having access to infrastructure facility, the chances are less that the Naxal will able to influence or convince the people to join their fold. So the government has both carrot and stick policy. The government also says that the Naxal to come and join the mainstream. And that is another way of looking at the Naxal problem in India. So at present, the government is having 4 or 5 different agendas or different policies. And that is the reason why the Naxal are not that effective in the last 10 years. You will find that in the last 10 years, especially post 2001, the present 21st century, the Naxal is slowly losing their stronghold in parts of India. It is now confined to very few places like Sukma and other places. And the way 20, 30 years back, the way the influence was, now it has reduced very less.
Thank you, sir. One more question. It is an interesting question by Nagma Khan. She's asking, sir, how in condition of relative deprivation, a person can go for non-violence protest?
Yeah, that is, you see, when you are not having minimum minimum requirements like food, clothing, and shelter. So how can you be part of the non-violent protest? So still, that is the reason why the Naxals have been very effective to draw the people to their fold, because they were giving them monthly salaries. They were giving them monetary benefits. Whenever there is a marriage in their family, they used to give them money. So that was what the Naxals were doing in order to bring them to the fold, because the government actually failed in the process of providing these basic minimum facilities. So the Naxals were providing it at one point of time. But it is basically the good policies and good governance and transparency and accountability of the government part, which will actually create a conducive atmosphere for creating wealth and opportunities and jobs in these areas, where I think the Naxal will fail and the government should take an active participation role in governance.
Thank you, sir. So I think we have taken up all the questions, and at the end now it is the time
Okay.
for formal vote of thanks, sir. I must thank you very much because you have covered such a broad area, from theoretical perspective to the issues in India relating to political violence, communal violence, caste violence, every aspect. And I hope this has developed a clear understanding in our student about the whole concept of political violence. So I thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time for us. And we hope that we'll keep you inviting and you will support us in future also by accepting our
Okay,
invitation.
always. That is,
Uh,
yeah, that is where I started my career.
so thank you very much, sir. I also want to thank all my colleagues from the department, Dr. Punita Pathak, Dr. Sneha uh, Patel, Dr. Jitendra Lalwani, and I also want to thank my student. They actually, in the last 4 days, I have seen they have raised very genuine, very relevant questions that makes us understand that actually they are listening to us, because in the online platform we all know that whether actually the participants are there or not, this kind of question make us understand that you are taking interest, and the questions were actually very important and very relevant. So I thank you all, and we hope that in future also you will participate in the same manner. So I thank one and all once again. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all.
So I will
So
send
I'm
you the reading material to your email on sometime, so you can
that will be
distribute it
very
among
kind
the
of you,
students.
sir. Yes, sir. That will be very kind of you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you all. So we'll once again meet students on Monday. That will be the last lecture of the lecture series. So thanks one and all. Now I'm closing the meeting. Bye bye, sir.